Okay, so today is the 3rd of January 2022, is the day when something happened to Friedrich Nietzsche, the great German philosopher. And by the way of this, we'll talk about Nietzsche and architecture. But let's begin to read a little bit about this very important philosopher, who I hope will continue to inspire us. But before I can begin to read a little bit about him, I have to activate, okay, an arrow. I succeed. So still have problem. It's unbelievable. It blocks my writing, this maddening tab. Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche was born in October, but he died in August 1900s. He was a German philosopher, cultural critic, composer, poet, writer, and philologist whose work has exerted a profound influence on modern intellectual history. He began his career as a classical philologist before turning to philosophy. He became the youngest person ever to hold the chair of classical philology at the University of Basel in 1869 at the age of 24. Not a little thing. Nietzsche resigned in 1879 due to health problems that plagued him most of his life. He completed much of his core writing in the following decade. In 1889, at the age 44, on this very day, January 3rd, he suffered a collapse and afterwards a complete loss of his mental faculties. He lived his remaining years in the care of his mother until her death in 1897, and then with his sister Elisabeth Förster Nietzsche. Nietzsche died in 1900. Nietzsche's writing spans philosophical polemics, poetry, cultural criticism, and fiction, while displaying a fondness for aphorism and irony. Prominent elements of his philosophy include his radical critique of truth in favor of perspectivism, a genealogical critique of religion and Christian morality, and related theory of master-slave morality. The aesthetic affirmation of life in response to both the death of God and the profound crisis of nihilism, the notion of Apollonian and Dionysian forces, and the characterization of the human subject as the expression of competing wills, collectively understood as the will to power. He also developed influential concepts such as the Übermensch and the doctrine of eternal return. In his later work, he became increasingly preoccupied with the creative powers of the individual to overcome cultural and moral mores in pursuit of new values and aesthetic health. His body of work touched a wide range of topics, including art, philology, history, religion, tragedy, culture, and science, and drew inspiration from figures such as Socrates, Zoroaster, Arthur Schopenhauer, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Richard Wagner, and Johann Wolfgang Goethe. I would add here also a great Persian poet, Hafiz or Hafez, whom he valued as much as he valued Goethe. But the Wikipedia articles, I guess, have a bias against Iran and Persia. But this was not Nietzsche. After his death, his sister Elisabeth became the curator and editor of Nietzsche's manuscripts. She edited his unpublished writings to fit her German ultra-nationalist ideology, while often contradicting or obfuscating Nietzsche's stated opinions, which were explicitly opposed to anti-Semitism and nationalism. Through her published editions, Nietzsche's work became associated with fascism and Nazism. 20th century scholars contested this interpretation, and corrected editions of his writings were soon made available. Nietzsche's thought enjoyed renewed popularity in the 1960s, and his ideas have since had a profound impact on 20th and early 21st century thinkers across philosophy. especially in schools of continental philosophy, such as existentialism, postmodernism, and post-structuralism, as well as art, literature, psychology, politics, and popular culture. This was him as a young man. Hello, Mr. Nietzsche. And here he was already ill, in the care first of his mother and then his sister. And this is a famous photograph of him with his famous mustache. So practically he's healthy, although he was plagued by health problems, but until 44, he somehow managed to live in a certain normal framework. But after 44, for 11 years, as we read, he was in the care of his mother and his sister. Here he is with his sister, and some Nietzsche quotations. I like quotations in general, and let's look at some of his quotations. Whatever is done for love always occurs beyond good and evil. Friedrich Nietzsche. This is not the Christian conception of what love is, but this relates to other thoughts he has on love, and we'll see them a little further on. Or madness is rare in individuals, but in groups, political parties, nations, and eras, it's the rule. He has a indeed, he was very fond of trying with very few words to say a lot. One spirit was God, then it became man, and now it is even becoming mob. Critical again of the mob. To live is to suffer. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. Friedrich Nietzsche. To live is to suffer. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. Woman was God's second mistake. A funny way to put it. Of course, you imagine very quickly what was the first mistake. Was Adam. Who else? So his opinion is quite strongly formulated. It is a funny way to put it. He actually points towards what he doesn't say, that God's first mistake was Adam, was man. Ultimately, it is the desire, not the desired, that we love. Interesting thought. So he seems to say that what we love is actually desire, not the desired one. We can debate about this. There are no facts, only interpretations. They should make us aware of how subjective actually the evaluations of the factuals or the factual are in architecture. I always had big problems with the grades given to projects. How could they be so factually ambitious to claim that they are correct? You know, like 6,67 or 8,23 or whatever, as if it's pharmacy. It's impossible. Evaluations in architecture cannot be totally objective. It is impossible. And he extends, of course, he didn't think of architecture and evaluating architectural projects. But since I'm talking to architecture students here and young architects, maybe I should say again this, that I'm totally against this apparent, extremely accurate evaluation of projects. Come on, it's impossible. And I gave us an example all the time, opera in Sydney, which was initially discarded by the jury, and only the arrival of the chief juror, Eero Saarinen, rescued it from the gutter. And now Sydney has the glorious building by John Hudson. The pure soul is a pure lie. Of course it is. But maybe the fathers of our enlightened church, enlightened by endless dogmas, should have the same courage to, like Nietzsche had, and say, there is no such a thing as a pure soul. Invisible threads are the strongest ties. this connects very much with what a scientist, a famous scientist said, that is Einstein, Albert Einstein, who said, in life, what counts is what cannot be counted, and what can be counted doesn't count. Well, what cannot be counted are these invisible threads. But are we listening to Nietzsche? Are we listening to Einstein? I don't think so. We only believe in facts, in the visible, not in the invisible, not in what cannot be counted. Love is blind, friendship closes its eyes. He does have his humor, indeed. This man, the most serious of philosophers, he was also capable of humor, just like the great film director Ingmar Bergman, who appears to be the most dark and pessimistic film director. In fact, has a very beautiful sense of humor and irony. The surest way to corrupt a youth is to instruct him to hold in higher esteem those who think alike than those who think differently. And I would like to look again at this quotation from this very, very, very important philosopher. Please think differently, and don't be seduced by dogmas and by following the mob and the asphalted road, the comfortable road. Think differently. It's very, very important to be yourself, not for the sake of thinking differently, but for the sake of being true to yourself. In essence, this is what he says: be true to yourself. And if you are corrupted by a system which tells you follow, the instructions from who knows who, have the courage to question them. There is always some madness in love, but there is also always some reason in madness. Indeed, this is what Hamlet seemed to say too in his in his statement that when he said, I'm talking about Shakespeare's character, I am mad, northwest. But yes, there is a reason in madness, and yes, there is always some madness in love. So you see that the connection between reason and madness is not absent. One can promise actions, but not feelings, for the latter are involuntary. He who promises to love forever or hate forever or be forever faithful to someone is promising something that is not in his power. Again, this man tells us the truth. You cannot make promises in the name of emotions or feelings which are beyond our will. Again, Ingmar Bergman said it very well. He said, in the field of emotions, we are all illiterates. But are we taking into consideration emotions? Into consideration? Very rarely, unfortunately. We only trust the brain and the so-called reason. But the emotions are actually more powerful. And it was Nietzsche again who said, thoughts are the shadows of emotions. There are two different types of people in the world: those who want to know and those who want to believe. Interesting distinction. It is my ambition to say in 10 sentences what others say in a whole book. And he succeeds very often. The stronger the person, the more demanding his love is. Yeah, and this connects with another thought or another aphorism from Nietzsche, that your best friends are actually your worst enemies, because the enemy is telling you, is alerting you, is not comforting you, like a soft sofa, is not cushioning you. You learn more from an enemy than from a friend. It depends. A true friend, I think, has the courage to tell you the truth, but those a little bit less than true, maybe do not do so very often. And this is the last quotation from him, which made me initially think to make a presentation about Nietzsche, music, and architecture. And I have plenty of material about that because I launched several competitions: a house for Pink Floyd, or Breaking the Wall, a house for even Lady Gaga, a house for Chopin, a house for Bach, not necessarily in this order. So the relationship between music and architecture is well illustrated in countless buildings, but also in projects that I encourage to come into being. Without music, life would be a mistake. Interesting, I noticed the appearance kind of often of this word, mistake. You remember when he said the woman was God's second mistake. Here again, well, that's how it is translated in English. But apropos of this, I always encourage the students to make mistakes in their projects. Make mistakes, the more the better. And jokingly, I even said in Sala Preșelor to many students, I told them, păcătuiți, make mistakes, because I am irritated by this obsession with correct buildings, behaving, well-behaved buildings. No, make buildings that are alive, not behaving. And in order to make them alive, you have to assume, the other side of the story, that, the fathers of the church, our church, seem to be inclined to hide under the rug. Anyway, now we go to the second presentation, Brutalist architecture, because I changed my mind. I will not talk today about music and architecture. I mean, Nietzsche, music and architecture. So I thought, but this is just a sketch, because this is a vast subject, and I think it's worth exploring this theme, brutalist architecture. Brutalist architecture. It came back to life, and the fascination with brutalist architecture took various forms. A few years ago, there was a big traveling exhibition, SOS, brutalist architecture in Vienna and other cities. Big books were published on the subject. Let's see a few examples of the brutalist architecture. But before we do that, I want to show you this quotation from Denis Diderot, the encyclopedist, the French encyclopedist, who I think put it very inspiringly when he said poetry requires something enormous, barbaric, and wild. Again, poetry requires something enormous, barbaric, and wild. And this connects with what Oscar Wilde said when he was very critical of moderation. He said moderation is fatal. Only excess succeeds. And brutalist buildings, in a way, are excessive. The problem is, can we afford to continue to be excessive at a time of sustainability, climate change, and so on? It's a legitimate question, and we have to be careful. But since the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche was called, by himself, actually, philosophy with a hammer, what about an architecture with a hammer? Of course, the hammer is used in building, but to use it psychologically and aesthetically, to use the hammer. In other words, to be at times violent, to provoke great, strong emotions. When you start a project, do you think of creating an architecture with an equally strong impact, like Nietzsche's philosophy had and has? If he was philosophizing with a hammer, how would you do a project, a building with a hammer in that sense? The violence of emotions. We are going to see this particular building in Köln, a very interesting church, in the third and last presentation tonight, more detailed. This is just an image. Another brutalist building, a little bit arrogant. I'm joking, of course, when I say a little bit, is not really my taste. The very engaging Fritz Wotruba Church in Vienna, built by a sculptor, which is considered by many perhaps a brutalist building. A residence, a house, a brutalist house, well, moderately brutalist, I would say, because here is too much concern with the aesthetics, I think, to be genuinely brutalist. Brutalist buildings threatened by right-wing politicians as part of attack on the welfare state. And indeed, there were famous buildings like by Ellison and Peter Smithson in London, threatened by the right-wing politicians, those who promote, capitalism, high-end capitalism, hardcore capitalism. The more profit, the better. And yes, of course, they are irritated by brutalist architecture because it's telling a truth which they cannot hide away from. But we see some examples of what is called brutalist architecture. Are they Nietzschean? I don't know. I mean, they belong to brutalist architecture, but they do have a passion and an intensity, often, including those such buildings built in Southeast Europe, particularly in former Yugoslavia, and we are going to see some remarkable buildings built by what was formerly Yugoslavia. This is actually in the United States, Paul Rudolph. This is Dennis Lasden in London. Not all of them really qualify from our point of view, but this only shows that, the mob, if I am to refer myself to the word used by Friedrich Nietzsche, is so afraid of what is raw, R-A-W, that it calls even buildings like this one is not truly brutalist, and it's not brutal. But yes, it has a frank display of geometry. There is a certain level of masculinist vigor, but is it really brutalist? I am not sure. Housing complex in Karaburma in Belgrade, 1963. Here, maybe to an extent, I don't know that, but you will see more convincing, I think, examples of brutalist architecture, if we are to call it so. I'm personally not very fond of this word brutalist because of the last three letters, IST. When it becomes a system, it cannot be brutal any longer. What is truly raw and brutal, if we are to use the word brutal, cannot become an ism or an ist. No. By the way, I don't know if you know, Zaha Hadid claimed that she wanted to create a raw, earthy and vital architecture. But my opinion is that she never arrived at a raw, I mean, truly raw architecture and even an earthy architecture. She might have arrived at a certain form of vigor, and many of her buildings show some qualities in this respect, but her architecture is too sleek to be considered raw. What is raw, we'll see a little bit later. Like this, here we could say it's a form of, rawness. It's raw, it's a detail of an interior, but brutalist buildings of Belgrade, that's how they are described. I don't know if they are really brutalist, but they do have this collective ethos, and they do have a kind of a raw power. A residential building by Leonardo Savioli, a very interesting architect, Leonardo Savioli. Again, this is just a sketch of a vast subject, which interests me a lot, what is so-called brutalist architecture. And Danilo Santis, 1964, 1967, is not really brutalist, but it's not. It's still, an educated building, and an educated brutalism is an oxymoron. How could be an educated or a sleek or an educated brutalism is nonsensical? But it's a fine building by Savioli, and he was a very interesting architect, by the way. Let's read his name again, Leonardo Savioli. about whom Carlo Giulio Argan also wrote. What is this? In Trieste, 1969, 1982, Lara complex. It's a housing complex. I don't know. I mean, we lived in communism. We have had blocks of flats, maybe not so, actually almost harmonious aesthetically speaking, but maybe they don't move us so much. But for the individualistic West, the large housing complexes where the communal took over appear to be, so-called brutal. No, but it is an interesting, assemblage of several units, if I am to call them so. And there is, personally, I think we need this cooperative spirit again in the world, because we fragmented the world very much in the name of private interests. What is this in Spain? Is it brutal? I don't know. Or brutalist. I still think these words are a little problematic. Brutalist architecture in Barcelona. To me, this is not brutal, but I found these images under this title, brutalist buildings in Barcelona. What is brutalist here, really? For some people, it might be. And what is brutalist in the famous housing complex by Ricardo Bofill and Taller de Arquitectura? Not really. In these pictures in black and white, but the colors are very, exuberant and luxurious. But this building by Herzog and de Moron, and we are going to see it in detail in the last short presentation, this one perhaps qualifies for being called, but no, I am still hesitant, because again, these two Swiss architects, immensely famous and immensely successful, it's an interesting essay, architectural essay they did in China, and I like this structure very much, which is called actually it's called a reading space or a reading room. But the contortions and the power of concrete, which again I think we should abstain from using a lot because it pollutes a lot. We'll come back to this interesting building, which usually we think of brutalist buildings being built 50 years ago or so. Well, they built this in the 21st century. So the brutalist state of mind, if we are to call it so, continues in our century. This is a building built by the Serb, by the former Yugoslavians, and we are going to see others. They built some incredible things in the country that is neighboring us. And now this building. I found it, searching for brutalist buildings, and even Intercontinental, the famous hotel in Bucharest appears there, maybe because of the bottom part. But we made it to the list. We can find other structures in Bucharest and Romania that qualify perhaps even better for what is called brutalism. I like this one very much, but I don't know what it is. I couldn't find. I was very curious. I wanted to find more pictures with it, and that's why I chose it for the message I sent out for tonight's presentation, because this in a way comes closer to what I might call, what I perceive as might be a possible illustration for a relationship between Friedrich Nietzsche and architecture. Not because it's sufficiently dirty, but it has a vigor, and it is not afraid to show even its problems. And I think in a way he was the philosopher who was able to bring to the fore what most people try to hide. This is, Les Fleurs du Mal. I know this building, but I like very much what's written there at the top, the famous collection of poems by the incredible French poet who brought modernity to poetry, Charles Baudelaire. And we are going to read together with you a short, very short poem by Baudelaire in the next presentation. Boston City Hall in Boston, they wanted to tear down this building. It would have been a terrible mistake, to use the word used by Nietzsche. Fortunately, they didn't. Because, you know, I think in a strange way, we are afraid of heroic deeds. Yes, it's somehow paradoxical that now, you know, when we are spoiled with so much technology and with so many possibilities, deep down, I think heroism, to be heroic, is discouraged. And architectural heroic gestures, not inflated, not arrogant, but heroic in a serious, sensitive sense, such heroic deeds are discouraged by society and other things. This is the Ministry of Highway Construction, Tbilisi, Georgia, 1975. Look at it. Even Rem Koolhaas looked at it and inspired himself copiously from this building, building what he did in Singapore, you know, the Switzerland of Southeast Asia. Yeah, he did it without saying thank you to these Georgian architects. Too bad. Anyway, it was a vigorous building, and it still is, you know. And when was it built? 1975. Not bad. Maybe it's not an accident that Georgia invested lately in the last years in a very progressive architecture and invited an architect like Jürgen Mayer to build some of his extravagant structures. Georgia is truly looking forward in terms of architecture, but also in terms of education. I read that education is very, very valued and very, very high in Georgia. We should think about this and maybe think about ways to make education in Romania forward-looking too. We have no excuse for not doing so. Basel College of Art and Design, these people, I didn't know anything about them until I pasted this text here from 1961. But these, you know, I took them from a site about brutalist architecture. Is too domesticated, too tamed. Even the presentation with the white and that white left and right. That's not how I would present. And you see in the third presentation, Tower House in Tokyo, Japan, 1966. This one is indeed, I would call it, you know, if we are to use this word, brutalist architecture, although the car there is not brutalist, but the building does have the vigor of and unafraid to show the, you know, the scars of the concrete. Personally, I like more something like this than the smooth, you know, comforting concrete of Tadao Ando. Orange County offices in New York. This is not a bad building, but it was demolished, if you can believe it, by the wise North Americans. They commit crimes too in this way, demolishing great buildings like the Larkin building by Frank Lloyd Wright in Buffalo, New York. They demolished it in order to build a so-called parking lot. What a shame. One of the best buildings by Frank Lloyd Wright. Brazil, 1974. I like what I see. You see, Nietzsche is teaching us to be true, to be full of passion, to be unafraid, to avoid cosmetic surgeries and the lies of, you know, so-called finishes, you know, to hide beautiful bricks behind plaster, to plaster truth. In other words, to suffocate truth. Here is not suffocated, the truth, and I like the building very much. You know, the more truth, the better. Even uncomfortable truth, yes. And unfortunately, maybe truth often is uncomfortable. What is this? Another building, Costa Rica. yeah, maybe it could qualify for a heroic stance in architecture. Embassy of Russia, Havana, Cuba, 1985. I don't know. I mean, you know, with the war next door, I cannot really admire too much anything coming from Russia. I'm sorry. I have the highest love for the Russian writers and the Russian artists, and you know, they had great contributions to culture. But what is happening now in Ukraine is unacceptable. I am very sorry. So this triumphalist, this is a triumphalist architecture. I wouldn't call it. In fact, true barbaric or you know, true brutalist architecture should never be triumphalist, because truth is not triumphalist. This building, I discovered this group Ensemble Studio in Spain. They did a very interesting work, but I don't like this house they built for themselves, which is called, even difficult to read, Hemeroscopium House in Madrid. It's, I would call it rather mega house and rather arrogant. And for me, if it is arrogant, it's not. I know it's a paradox. You could say that I am wrong, but for me, a true brutalist statement cannot be arrogant. Arrogance means, I mean, it depends, of course, because there is the macho mentality, but brutalist for me is externalizing truth, and arrogance is actually emphasizing certain parts of what we call truth beyond the truthfulness. I guess this is what I'm trying to say. I'm still, the jury is still out about these people, because I like them on one hand, but not for this building. This is their own house, and they are so-called hot. I understood that they won the competition for the, I don't know, a new building for the European Parliament. I like what she says, Deborah Mesa, who is the partner of, I mean, there are two architects, a he and a she, and she is the she, of course. Architecture out of the comfort zone. I also believe we have to get rid of our infatuation with the banality of comfort. Really, architecture is not about, you know, being comfortable. That's not architecture. That is not architecture, and I'm totally on the side of Peter Eisenman, who despised, you know, comfort too. You know, whatever Ernest Neuffer might say, or who knows who, architecture is about something else. And I think Nietzsche would have advised us to stay away from the obsession with comfort. Architecture should be out of the comfort zone. Deborah Mesa is right, but unfortunately, this house they built, which is actually very comfortable, and I'm sorry to say it, but it's properly called the Bravura House. This Bravura House, and again, for me, a truly brutalist house cannot be a Bravura. But let's read. This Bravura house gives the illusion of a huge weight of concrete supported by nothing more than a sheer glass wall. It is the home of Anton Garcia Abril and Deborah Mesa, principals of the architecture practice Ensemble Studio, who say that engineering took a year, while the prefabricated structure was erected in just 7 days. This is the building. It appears to have some elements of what might be called brutalist, but I'm afraid it is not sincere enough. And there is a lot of exhibitionism here, you know. I mean, this was built not too long ago, right? And when the world began to show signs of being exhausted by our human excesses. Yeah, what do they want to say? And it doesn't have intimacy, you know. A private home, I think, should not look like a, you know, a highway, and or like a, you know, intercontinental, I don't know what, or it's exhibitionism here. This is not truth. It is a bravura. So I contest this building. I have to study it a little further, but these are my first perceptions. As opposed to the Oita library built by Arata Isozaki, this a great work is both animated by Elan Vital, is flying, but it's also modest. I do not see modesty here. But I like this picture, which is probably produced with Photoshop or I don't know what techniques. It's not a real building, I think, but I do like it. I confess. So this is the last image of this second presentation, and now we'll go to the last one, which is a theme that I became interested in by the way of Nietzsche. I hope my laptop is allowing me to continue. Okay. I called it Between Dionysus and the Crucified, because apparently after he fell sick, ill, Friedrich Nietzsche, on the day of January 3rd, 1889, he began to sign, paradoxically, unexpectedly, some of his writings, sometimes with Dionysus, other times with the Crucified, and it's almost hard to believe because they are opposites. And I will try to comment a little bit on this pair of opposites. Let's see a little bit about Dionysus. Who was Dionysus? And why did Nietzsche love Dionysus? Because he did. He was the god of intoxication. In ancient Greek religion and myth, Dionysus is the god of the grape harvest, winemaking, orchards and fruit, vegetation, fertility, festivity, insanity, ritual madness, religious ecstasy, and theater. The Romans call him Bacchus. For a frenzy he is said to induce called Bacchaea. As Dionysus Eleutherius, the liberator, his wine, music, and ecstatic dance free his followers from self-conscious fear and care and subvert the oppressive restraints of the powerful. I think architects should read very carefully about Dionysus. Can we do a Dionysian architecture? I would welcome it, to be honest with you. I would welcome it because I'm sick and tired of timid architecture. I understand, again, we have a climate change that is very dramatic and very serious. I understand sustainability. I understand the seas levels are going up and the icebergs are melting. I understand also pollution. But we can do an architecture which dances even with limited means, if we change something in our mentality. I am totally against students being told to do architectura cum patata. No, no way. It has to have a different spirit. And I think Friedrich Nietzsche was trying to bring to philosophy, to bring back blood, to bring back vitality. You know, he was sick and tired of a philosophy that was correct and pale and rational or rationalistic. He wanted emotions. Can we bring emotions back to architecture? I think it's crucial that we do so. So again, wine, music, and ecstatic dance free his followers from self-conscious fear and care. I'm afraid we do now architecture out of fear and excessive self-care and an obsession with comfort. Architecture is about something else. His Tirsus, a fennel scepter, sometimes one with ivy and dripping with honey, is both a beneficent wand and a weapon used to destroy those who oppose his cult, meaning the Dionysian cult, and the freedoms he represents. Because yes, this is what Dionysus represents, freedom. Those who partake of his mysteries are believed to become possessed and empowered by the god himself. His origins of Dionysus are uncertain, and his cults took many forms. Some are described by ancient sources as Thracians, others as Greek. In Orphic religion, he was variously a son of Zeus and Persephone, a chthonic and underworld aspect of Zeus, or the twice-born son of Zeus and the mortal Semele. The Eleusinian mysteries identify him with Iacchus, the son of husband of Demeter. My God, the Greeks have so many gods that you get lost. Most accounts say he was born in Thrace, Thracia, traveled abroad and arrived in Greece as a foreigner. His attribute of foreignness, I love foreigners, as an arriving outsider, I love outsiders, God may be inherent and essential to his cults. As he is a god of epiphany, sometimes called the god that comes. Beautiful. The god that comes, or the god who arrives. And now we see some images of the god of intoxication from art. And again, Dionysus was immensely important for Friedrich Nietzsche. And we see in his hand the Tirsus, and we are going to read a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful short text by Charles Baudelaire called the Tirsus, which I hope will inspire us to towards an architecture of great passion and sensitivity. Dionysus. Of course, Dionysus is classically opposed to Apollo. So you have Apollo and you have Dionysus, but they complement each other and they are correlative. It's said that he was riding a panther. Well, who could do that? Dionysus was able to. Yeah, but he is connected with love, with wine, with passion, with abandonment. He is also represented with with a coiling serpent. The serpent is the troubling serpent we are so afraid of, and with good reasons perhaps. Is sometimes represented in images depicting Dionysus. Anyway, you can find a very rich material on the web about Dionysus, this difficult god. And I really would like to see a Dionysian architecture, a dancing architecture, an intoxicated architecture, but how to actually do it at a time of climate change and sustainability, I don't know. But I think it's possible. And I saw some examples in Bangladesh, one of the poorest countries in the world. They build beautiful things very, very, very modestly. Dionysus again, Dionysus again, and we see the grapes coming out of his beard, and we also see the two horns coming out of his head. And now, let me read this short poem by Charles Baudelaire. Get drunk, because talking about Dionysus is appropriate to talk about intoxication. Get drunk, always be drunk. That's it, the great imperative. In order not to feel, by the way, I interrupt myself now, I only drink buttermilk. So always be drunk, that's it, the great imperative. But I don't need to drink wine because I was born drunk under the sign of the dark moon. So that's why I only drink buttermilk. Sorry for this short digression. So again, get drunk, always be drunk. That's it, the great imperative. In order not to feel time's horrid fardel bruise your shoulders, grinding you into the earth, get drunk and stay that way. On what? On wine, poetry, virtue, whatever. I would add architecture. But get drunk. And if sometimes happen to wake up on the porches of a palace, in the green grass of a ditch, in the dismal loneliness of your own room, your drunkenness gone or disappearing, ask the wind, ask the wave, the star, the bird, the clock. Ask everything that flees, everything that groans or rolls or sings, everything that speaks. Ask what time it is. And the wind, the wave, the star, the bird, the clock will answer you. Time to get drunk. Don't be martyr slaves of time. Get drunk, stay drunk on wine, virtue, poetry, or architecture. And now I will read a very similar poem written by the great Romanian poet Lucian Blaga. Unfortunately, I don't have the English translation, so I will read it in Romanian. I regret that those who do not know Romanian will not understand it. It's truly beautiful. Veniți după mine, tovarăși, veniți lângă mine, tovarăși, e toamnă, se coace pe linul în boabe de struguri și în gușe de viperi veninul. Cu un chiot vreau astăzi să închin în cistea sălbaticei mele minuni, care pleacă, lăsându-mă singur. Again, apare, eu am eliminat-o și apare automat acea adresă de unde am luat textul, iertați-mă, lăsându-mă singur cu plânsul, cu voi și cu toamna. Veniți mai aproape și cel care are urechi de auzit să audă. Durerile nu sunt adânci decât atunci când râd. Ce minunat paradox, e adevărat. Să râdă deci astăzi în mine amarul și în hohote mari să-și arunce pocalul în nori. Veniți lângă mine, tovară, să bem. Ha, ha, ce licărește așa straniu pe cer? E cornul de lună? Nu, nu, e un ciop dintr-o cupă de aur ce am spart-o de boltă cu brațul de fier. Sunt beat și aș vrea să dărâm tot ce-i vis, ce e templu și altar. Veniți lângă mine, tovarăși, că mâine o să mor, mâine o să mor, dar vă las moștenire superbul meu craniu din care să beți pelin când vi-e dor de viață și o travă când vreți să-mi urmați. Veniți după mine, tovarăși. Am fost cam emoționat că o să o citesc potrivit, dar într-adevăr e minunat acest poem al lui Blaga. And now I come back to English and I end this literary intermezzo with another beautiful text of Charles Baudelaire about the Tirsus, the scepter that Dionysus had and has. This is a Tirsus, in essence, with a plant spiraling around the stick. And it was the scepter of Dionysus. Let's read a little bit. A Tirsus was a wand or a staff, I think I read this already, but I'll read it again, was a wand or staff of giant fennel, Ferula communis, oh wow, wow, covered with ivy, vines and leaves, sometimes wound with a tenier and topped with a pine cone arch. God, I get lost, too much scholasticism here, or by a bunch of vine leaves and grapes or ivy leaves and berries carried during Hellenic festivals and religious ceremonies. The Tirsus is typically associated with the Greek god Dionysus and represents a symbol of prosperity, fertility, and hedonism, similarly to Dionysus. And now we look at two images, well, another one with this Tirsus, and then the incredible text by Charles Baudelaire. It was dedicated to Franz Liszt, the great composer. What is a Tirsus? According to the moral and poetical sense, it is a sacerdotal emblem in the hand of the priests or priestesses celebrating the divinity of whom they are the interpreters and servants. But physically, it is no more than a baton, a pure staff, a hop pole, a vine prop, dry, straight and hard. Around this baton, in capricious meanderings, stems and flowers twine and wanton, these sinuous and fugitive, those hanging like bells or inverted cups. And an astonishing complexity disengages itself from this complexity of tender or brilliant lines and colors. Would not one suppose that the curved line and the spiral pay their court to the straight line and twine about it in a mute adoration? Would not one say that all these delicate corolsen, all these calyces, explosions of odors and colors, execute a mystical dance around the hieratic staff? And what imprudent mortal will dare to decide whether the flowers and the vine branches have been made for the baton or whether the baton is not but a pretext to set forth the beauty of the vine branches and the flowers. Here we have another page, but I would like to say, please, please, please reconsider ornament. You cannot have structure without ornament, just like you cannot have the tirsus just with a vertical straight button and not the flower spiraling around it. It's immensely important that we begin to use again the word ornament, and we begin to understand that we cannot have structure without ornament, just as we cannot have ornament without structure. And Baudelaire, without referring to architecture, says the same thing. They need each other. The button, the vertical straight element, and the spiraling plants or flowers around it are correlative. They need each other the same very way, structure and ornament. And now I continue with Charles Baudelaire. The tirsus is the symbol of your astonishing duality. He was talking to Franz Liszt. O powerful and venerated master, dear bacchanal of a mysterious and impassioned beauty. Never a nymph excited by the mysterious Dionysus shook her tirsus over the heads of her companions with as much energy as your genius trembles in the hearts of your brothers. The baton is your will, erect, firm, unshakable. The flowers are the wanderings of your fancy around it. The feminine element encircling the masculine with her elusive dance. Straight line and arabesque intention and expression, the rigidity of the will and the suppleness of the world of a variety of means, united for a single purpose, the all-powerful and indivisible amalgam that is genius. What analyst will have the detestable courage to divide or to separate you? Again, dear architects and students in architecture, do not divide and do not separate the feminine from the masculine, the ornament from the structure. Please, 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 they need each other. Just like very well Charles Baudelaire said it here, in the duality of the two elements that make together the tirsus. Dear Franz Liszt, across the fogs, beyond the flowers, in towns where the pianos chant your glory, where the printing house translates your wisdom, in whatever place you be, in the splendor of the eternal city, or among the fogs of the dreamy towns that Cambrinus consoles, improvising rituals of delight or ineffable pain, or giving to paper your abstruse meditations. Singer of eternal pleasure and pain, philosopher, poet, and artist, I offer you the salutation of immortality. You know, I make all the efforts to convey to you that in the absence of passion, we are not architects. We are not. Temples of Dionysus, just scattered fragments, you know. But as Geme Cantacuzino said, talking about the scattered fragments of columns at Persepolis, for the spirit they are enough. This is just a quick aide-memoire of you know, some remains, some fragments from temples dedicated to this great god that the Greeks valued so much and whom we forgot. We forgot in the name of civilization, forgetting also that architecture belongs to culture, not to civilization, as beautifully and succinctly said Alvar Aalto. Yes, architecture belongs to culture, not to civilization. Very strong statement. I'm very happy that Alvar Aalto put it so brilliantly. Kenneth Frampton wrote to me that he will go to his grave having in mind these few words by Alvar Aalto. Architecture belongs to culture, not to civilization. That is, not to the refrigerator, not to the toilet, not to the pipes, and not to the parking lot, but to culture. We neglect culture, we neglect mythology, we neglect Dionysus, we neglect Friedrich Nietzsche, we neglect Charles Baudelaire, we neglect Lucian Blaga, we neglect them because we are obsessed with the technicalities which we think is the essence of architecture, that they are the essence of architecture. They are not. Dionysus, I don't know where this is anyway. I'm just trying to incite you, to provoke your curiosity towards Dionysus. And now the crucified is Jesus. Well, I just show, I came across, there is even some kind of a, I don't know, new wave rock, or I don't know how it is called. I like this image because it's about duality. But if the crucified and the pillars of humanity, I don't know, they represent. I just chose this image. Moving forward, we know images, we have seen images of crucifixion. This is Grünwald, a great German painter, the greatest of all. The idea is how to marry the crucified with the Dionysus. And my question is, was Nietzsche, if indeed he signed his latest writings and letters with Dionysus and the crucified, was he really mad? I mean, it appears because he tried to reconcile the opposites, but maybe he arrived at a wisdom that was so wise that it appeared mad. I don't know, but I'm launching a question, and a provocation. How to marry the intoxication of Dionysus with the other kind of intoxication, because here is also about the absolute. No, the Son of God sacrificed himself for us, for the human beings, in order for us to sit comfortably on the comfortable sofa and watch ridiculous movies coming from Hollywood. That's why Jesus died for us, and to eat sarmale to death. Here is the crucifixion by a great British, you see his name is Graham Sutherland, truly one of the greatest British painters, a modern painter, of course. So Great Britain had not only Francis Bacon, who is better known, but also Graham Sutherland, who was very interested in painting very moving crucifixions. This is also a drawing by him, by Sutherland. Then El Greco, of course. Anyway, there is so much art, and this short trip through the artistic representations or the depictions of the crucifixion will end with Salvador Dali, a man who knew how to bring the theater into painting and painting to theater. Here he is, dramatic even in his stance, with a crucifixion behind. And again, another crucifixion by Salvador Dali. And this is the last image which I chose intentionally, because what do we look at here? The comfortable armchair and the depiction of the ultimate tragedy, or one of the most known tragedies in the world, the crucifixion of Christ. And it seems to me that architects and students in architecture are encouraged to consider higher, or to prefer the comfortable armchair instead of the meanings of the painting here displayed on the wall. Perhaps the architect, if the architect chooses to sit on that seductive armchair, but not turn his or her back to this painting to reflect on what it means and never forget. Brutalist architect